So, an entrepreneur, according to the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, is a person who sets up a business or businesses taking financial risks in the hope of profits. Sounds reasonable, right? Now, typically when I use the word entrepreneur, this is the kind of image that comes to mind. Yeah? Individuals who took financial risks and did very well for themselves. This is not the kind of entrepreneur I'll be talking about in the next 10 minutes. Instead, this is the kind of entrepreneur I'll be talking about in the next 10 minutes. In fact, the micro-entrepreneur, generally in a developing country and generally very poor, is by far the most common type of business in the world. Many of the challenges that we discussed this morning actually have their roots in the challenges facing micro-entrepreneurs. Just to define a micro-entrepreneur, it's an owner of a business with 5 or less employees, generally informal, and generally barely eking out a living. Unlike, for example, many of our graduates at London Business School, the world of the micro-entrepreneur may appear to be very different from the world that we live in. But I would posit that the world of the micro-entrepreneur is profoundly important to us. This horrible image is the image of a fruit and vegetable seller named Mohamed Bouazizi in Tunisia. Many suggest that the incredible events that have been happening in the Arab world over the last several years, some of which we discussed earlier today, owe their origins to that incredible act by Mohamed Bouazizi, where because of his frustrations and his inability to even eke out a living, he set himself on fire. And that led to the entire landscape of Tunisia certainly changing. The president was toppled, a man there seeing Mohamed Bouazizi, and indeed the fires from that flame spread throughout the Arab world, some argue elsewhere as well. So now, back to the kinds of worlds that we tend to live in, although it might look as if this world of the micro-entrepreneur barely eking out a living is very different from ours. What we're finding is that, in fact, it matters even to those of us who don't necessarily care about what's happening outside the world, outside our own real world, because it matters. If you work for a multinational company, odds are your future customers will be micro-entrepreneurs, because about half of the world's poor eke out a living as micro-entrepreneurs. So that wonderful image that Linda had this morning of the Maasai warrior, odds are that warrior is no longer a warrior, is probably a micro-entrepreneur, eking out a living. Or if you could be mighty Nestle with hundreds of thousands of employees, your supply chain depends crucially on hundreds of thousands of micro-entrepreneurs growing cocoa in places like Ghana or Cote d'Ivoire. You could be Coca-Cola. Your distribution channel and strategy and success depends on the future of millions, indeed tens of millions of micro-entrepreneurs, especially in developing countries. So even if it doesn't, if we want to be purely selfish, it still matters to us. The lives of these micro-entrepreneurs matter to us. And this was the insight that my colleague, Professor Michael Hay had. Michael Hay is, unlike many of us in academia, not just a thinker, he's also a doer. And he asked this question: what if every entrepreneur had access to business education? And as a doer, he created an NGO called Business Bridge. The objective of Business Bridge, the vision of Business Bridge, is to offer high-quality, low-cost, almost free business education to those who cannot otherwise afford to come to places like London Business School. Right around that time, as Business Bridge was getting started, this gentleman, Stephen Anderson McDonald, who's my PhD student, actually is the newest faculty member at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, a graduate of London Business School, was thinking about a PhD dissertation project. And so Stephen came in and said, well, let's add to Michael's vision and try to examine the answer to this question. What if everyone had access to business education? Specifically, what is the impact of business education on prosperity, on growth, on employment? Now, the question that Stephen asked may seem like one that should be addressed, but there are many who believe that really business education per se is not necessarily the thing that entrepreneurs or certainly the poor necessarily need. No less a luminary than Professor Muhammad Yunus points out in his book that the poor do not need us to teach them how to survive. They already know. So rather than waste our time teaching them new skills, such as business skills, we should try to make maximum use of their existing skills. Well, doubts of this sort have been expressed by others as well, but that wasn't going to a Nobel Prize winner wasn't going to dissuade Stephen. Stephen and his family moved down to South Africa, which was the focus of the world's first randomized controlled trial to examine the impact of marketing education versus finance education on prosperity, on growth, and on survival of businesses. So we went, Stephen and I, along with Bilal Zia at the World Bank, and a team, went door to door in township communities in Cape Town, identified a group of 832 entrepreneurs, and then through a lottery, 1/3 of these entrepreneurs got training for 10 weeks, half a day a week, in either marketing or finance. The other 1/3 was promised the same scholarship for training in marketing or finance, not then, but in 18 months. Because of supply constraints, we couldn't offer it to them right then, but in 18 months. And that group serves as our control group. It was in South Africa. If you've been to Cape Town, you may recognize some of these areas, largely township communities. And what I'm going to show you next is, very briefly, the results of the study to ask the question, what if every entrepreneur had access to business education? I'm going to compare the effects of marketing training relative to a control group that did not receive the training but is otherwise identical. So these are small business owners, barbers, tailors, grocery store owners, and so on. Some who got 1/3 randomly got marketing training, 1/3 randomly got finance training, and then we compare each of them to those in the control group. So this is roughly what the training looks like. They come in groups of about 20 or so, and smaller groups within the class. There is a guided discussion of sort of simple concepts around, in this case, customers. There is in-class exercises. There is homework that happens. This is a picture from the graduation ceremony that we went through after 10 weeks. I have to say, this was one of the most emotional educational experiences I've had. Even though I wasn't the person doing this here, individuals came to us and said, this is the first time we've graduated from anything. Yeah? So first time we heard, long live London Business School, ever uttered, certainly. This gentleman actually is a tailor. He stitched his own suit just with incredible embroidery for this. So what happens? So they graduated, and then we tracked them for 18 months after that point. What happens to those in the marketing versus the finance condition relative to those in the control group? A basic measure is the business still alive 18 months later? And in both cases, the businesses are more likely to be alive 18 months later. Okay? They may be alive, but are they making any more money than their peers who did not get the education? Turns out, substantially more than their peers. Now, 86% sounds like a lot. It turns out 86% increase is about $300 a month. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but actually, $300 a month is what the South African equivalent of Asda or Tesco pays its floor-level employees. The next thing I wanted to note is the path to profits. Turns out there are differences. When you get marketing training relative to finance training, the marketers tend to sell more. The finance also, but at about half the level as the marketers. The marketers also tend to hire more. Finance also but at about half the level as the marketing folks. Overall, what we're noticing is that if you get, when these entrepreneurs got training in marketing versus finance, those in the marketing group tended to go into a growth mindset. Those in the finance group tended to go into an efficiency and cost-oriented mindset. So let me end by asking the question again, what if every entrepreneur had access to quality business education? Well, this is a question that I've been discussing with members of government, for instance, in South Africa, where 50% unemployment is quite common in many township communities. How many people each of these business owners hires makes a huge difference. So let me end by asking a few what-if questions myself. What if we could offer quality business education to millions of entrepreneurs? There's a lot that's happening around this area, and it seems like an incredibly positive thing one could be doing. What if we could solve poverty through better business? Not just through better business by the likes of Unilever or indeed Reuters or Thomson, but better business at the level of the micro-entrepreneur. Finally, let me end by saying, what if we could get a glimpse into our own lives through the lives of micro-entrepreneurs? What we've been doing at London Business School is taking our MBAs, about 90 of them work with micro-entrepreneurs in a township in South Africa. And what we're realizing is that there's arguably even more learning happening in the other direction for our students from the micro-entrepreneurs in South Africa. And finally, our research on CEOs of the largest corporations on earth, which is a part of a discussion I'll discuss a little later on, is suggesting remarkably similar patterns. The trajectories we have as individuals in business, whether it's a marketing trajectory or a finance trajectory, shapes our mindsets and shapes our actions. And what we're seeing with the CEOs is their early careers in marketing versus finance seems to shape how they act 20, 30 years later. The pathways to profits seem to be different. Thank you very much.